One of the workshops during the day is called Bristlebots, and the tutor who leads the workshop is Gareth. Gareth, what happens in the Bristlebots workshop?
Okay, so the Bristlebots are mainly a prompt to get children to discuss about what it means to be alive. So you can quite see it easily there, sort of moving around.
Yes, okay, well, whether I would actually say it's alive, I don't know. Well, you're a science tutor. If I came to you in a science lesson and I asked you to define life, what would you say?
So yeah, I mean that's a normal question in a lot of science classrooms, and I suppose a science teacher and children would define it in terms of life processes. So the sort of acronym is Mrs. Gren. So you're looking at movement, as we saw there, but what we're missing is respiration, sensitivity, the idea they need nutrients, they excrete, they reproduce.
So just as a thought then, I could kind of add those on, couldn't I?
Yeah.
I mean, as you said, at the moment it's moving. I could do something to do with growth where it plugged a few more bits onto itself. In fact, I could try to get a robot to be alive in the scientific sense of the word, couldn't I?
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's how the workshop then moves on. Is we actually ask the children how you can make it more alive. And then it opens up some more interesting questions around what it actually means to be alive.
So do they think that they could get a Bristlebot to be alive?
Not necessarily in a scientific sense. What I find quite interesting is when they start looking at it more sort of philosophically, and they address sort of character and sort of tastes, and particularly around sort of senses, and do they like music? Would they be good friends? Is quite interesting.
It does add a lot of dimensions to a Bristlebot, doesn't it?
Yes.
When you're asking whether it could be a good friend. I think it's seriously grown from being a Bristlebot. I'm interested too in how the classrooms operate and the way that different classrooms create a framework around the way that we think while we're inside that classroom. And it does occur to me that if you took that same question, what does it mean to be alive? If you took that question to a religious studies classroom, you get a really different answer. In fact, some students might say, well, to be alive means to have soul. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. So the context is really important here, and what's interesting from my perspective as a science teacher is that the discussion around the life processes kind of starts and ends in the science classroom. I've never heard that sort of question being asked by a child, particularly around soul, in a science lesson, and I don't think a teacher would even answer that if they were even asked it, and even if the kids are thinking it, I don't think they would ask it, because I think that entrenched compartmentalisation and of the disciplines is there in the schools. So
earlier on we were listening to some young people, and they were explaining to me what they thought was working about their science education at the moment. They were actually quite impressed by both what they were doing in science and indeed their education full stop. Well, we're a little bit further on. We're really starting to think now about what science education should look like in the future. And well, I have an idea, and I'll see how you go with this. I think that the entrenched compartmentalisation is a problem, because I think that it means that we do forget to even ask the bigger question while we're in the science classroom. And I'm concerned that then maybe we have understood the nature of science, but potentially there are misperceptions. There are some ideas that we haven't really understood about science just because we're using the classroom walls to make the boundary around our understanding rather than actually exploring the boundary firsthand. What do you think?
Yes, so I think there's a misperception of children walking into a science laboratory and they think, I'm here to do science. What's interesting is that school science presents itself as kind of a truth, and most people in the science community, in fact all I would say, are tentative about that and say, well, we're presenting a particular set of knowledge that can be challenged, and I don't think children necessarily see that through what school science offers, and by having it entrenched within the disciplines means that they can't explore those wider questions. And like I said, I think a lot of kids do have wider questions, but would feel inappropriate to ask in a science classroom because they're doing science.
Yes, I agree. And as I say, I'd go on a step and I'd say it actually causes misperceptions about the nature of science, that in order to understand the nature of science, it's helpful sometimes to see science and another discipline and think about how they rattle together, sometimes very successfully and sometimes potentially with a few conflicts. So that is one of the changes I would make. And so Gareth, what about you? What would you like to change in science education?
So we are kind of already addressing some of the issues I'm finding, where we actually look at the limitations of particular scientific models. The problem I have is that those models are actually limited to particular pieces of knowledge that we're required to learn. So I think for me, having that sort of wider view and look at the limitation of science in general and looking at it from a more of a multidisciplinary approach would be a much stronger way of looking at science.